The Grand Council Chamber was the most beautiful place in the known galaxy. It floated in the heart of a purple and gold nebula, built from crystal that had taken 1,000 years to grow. Light from distant stars passed through its walls and created rainbows that danced across the floor. For 3,000 years, the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy had gathered here to solve their problems with words instead of weapons. Ambassador Una Park stood at the human podium and tried not to show her fear. She was 34 years old, with black hair pulled back in a simple style and dark eyes that missed nothing. Her gray diplomatic uniform felt too tight. Behind her stood Admiral Taiho Kang, a tall man with silver hair and the calm face of someone who had seen many battles. He wore his military dress uniform, which looked plain and simple compared to the flowing robes and glittering jewelry worn by the other species. The chamber was filled with beings that looked nothing like humans. Some had too many arms. Some had no arms at all. Some floated in tanks of strange liquids. Some glowed with inner light. All of them were old. Their species had traveled between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. The High Speaker of the Council raised one of his many thin arms. His skin was clear like glass, and Una could see his 3 hearts beating slowly inside his chest. His species, the Valori, had created the Council long ago. They believed that all problems could be solved through talk and compromise. The Council recognizes the human delegation, the High Speaker said. His voice was soft and musical. We have studied your request about the Kepler colonies. We are ready to give our decision. Una took a deep breath. The Kepler colonies were 5 farming worlds at the edge of human space. 200,000 people lived there, growing food that fed a dozen other human planets. 6 months ago, the hegemony had surrounded those worlds with warships. Nothing could go in. Nothing could come out. High Speaker, Una said, keeping her voice steady. The hegemony's blockade has already killed 12,000 of our people. They died because medicine could not reach them. They died because food ran out. Children died. Old people died. Sick people died. We are asking the Council to make the hegemony stop. A deep rumbling sound came from across the chamber. It was laughter, but not friendly laughter. Ambassador Vorath of the hegemony was enjoying himself. Vorath was huge. His species had evolved on a heavy gravity world, and he stood nearly 3 meters tall. His skin was like gray stone, and his eyes were small and cruel. The hegemony controlled more space than any other species. They had thousands of warships. They had conquered dozens of younger species over the centuries. They took what they wanted because no one could stop them. The humans built colonies on worlds they did not own, Vorath said. His voice was like rocks grinding together. They did not ask permission. They did not follow the proper procedures. The blockade is simply the enforcement of existing law. Law that the hegemony wrote, Una replied. Law that the hegemony enforces. Law that only benefits the hegemony. The chamber went quiet. Speaking so directly was considered rude among the elder races. They preferred to hide their meaning behind pretty words and complicated phrases. Una did not care about pretty words. She cared about the 12,000 dead. The High Speaker made a gesture that meant he wanted peace. Ambassador Park, please understand. The Council has worked very hard to find a solution that makes everyone happy. We believe we have found a fair compromise. Una felt Admiral Kang shift his weight behind her. They had both known this moment was coming. They had talked about it many times during the long journey to the Council. The Council proposes this, the High Speaker continued. The humans will leave 3 of the 5 colony worlds. They will move all their people and equipment to the other 2 worlds. In exchange, the hegemony will end the blockade. They will also send food and medicine to help the survivors. It sounded reasonable. It sounded fair. That was how the council always worked. They found solutions that sounded fair, but actually gave everything to the strong and nothing to the weak. And what about the 12,000 who already died? Yuna asked. No one answered. The question hung in the air like smoke. I see, Yuna said quietly. She touched the small computer pad built into her podium. The human delegation has discussed this matter with our government on Earth. We have been given our instructions. She paused. We refused the council's compromise. The chamber erupted in noise. Species that had not spoken in centuries suddenly found their voices. The translator in Yuna's ear struggled to keep up with all the different languages. Varath pushed forward, his massive body making the floor shake. You refuse? You are one small species from one small world. You have been traveling between stars for less than 100 years. You do not get to refuse. Yuna looked up at him without fear. Admiral Kang had taught her that trick when she was young. Never show fear. Even when you feel it, never show it. We refuse today, she said. Then you will face the consequences. Varath turned to address the whole council. The hegemony will not accept this insult. If the humans will not leave peacefully, we will remove them by force. Our fleet is already moving. In 3 weeks, there will be no human presence in the Kepler sector. The High Speaker raised his arms, trying to restore calm. Please, let us not speak of violence. There must be another way. Perhaps if we adjust the terms slightly. There is nothing to adjust, Varath interrupted. The humans have made their choice. Now they will learn what that choice costs. Yuna remained at her podium as chaos filled the chamber around her. She watched the other delegations argue and shout and wave their various limbs. None of them were arguing in humanity's favor. They were arguing about how the war would affect their own interests, about trade routes, about political alliances, about profit and loss. Not one of them mentioned the 12,000 dead. Admiral Kang leaned close to her ear. Are you certain about this? No, Yuna admitted. But my grandmother taught me something when I was young. She survived 3 wars on Earth. She told me that there are moments when you must stand up, even if standing up means you might fall. Because if you don't stand up, you lose something more important than your life. You lose yourself. The hegemony has 200 warships. I know. They've conquered species older and stronger than us. I know that too. Kang was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened his uniform and nodded. Then I should return to the fleet. We have a lot of work to do. Yuna watched him leave the chamber. He moved through the crowd of alien delegates like a ship through rough water, steady and unshakable. She had known him since she was a child, when her father served under his command. He had never lied to her. He had never made a promise he could not keep. When he said they had work to do, she believed him. The council session continued for several more hours, but nothing important was decided. The elder races were still arguing about procedure and protocol when Yuna finally left. She walked through the crystal corridors of the station, past viewports that showed the beautiful nebula outside, past diplomats and servants and guards who looked at her, with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. They thought humanity was finished. They thought the war would last a few weeks at most. They thought the hegemony would crush the young species from Earth and everything would go back to normal. They were wrong. But they would not understand that for a while yet. In her small quarters, Yuna sat alone and composed a message to Earth. It was short and simple. Just 3 words that would change the history of the galaxy. Operation Sunrise. Begin. Then she poured herself a cup of tea and waited for the war to start. Admiral Taiho Kang stood in the command center of the battleship Earth's Pride and watched the fleet gather. Through the massive view screen, he could see ships arriving from every corner of human space. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers. their hulls painted dark gray to blend with the void. They came from Earth and Mars and the colony worlds, from hidden shipyards and asteroid belts and secret bases in dead star systems. For 60 years, humanity had been building this fleet in secret. For 60 years, they had prepared for a war they hoped would never come. Kang remembered the day humanity first met the elder races. He had been a young officer then, barely 20 years old, serving on one of the first ships to travel beyond the solar system. They had found the relay station that connected to the Galactic communication network, and suddenly they were not alone anymore. The excitement had been incredible. Millions of people had celebrated in the streets. Scientists talked about sharing knowledge with ancient civilizations. Politicians talked about joining a community of peaceful species. Everyone believed that the galaxy would welcome humanity with open arms. The truth had been different. The elder races looked at humanity and saw only a primitive species from a small planet. They saw potential workers, potential servants, potential customers. They did not see equals. They did not see friends. The council had rules for young species. They could trade, but only for goods the elder races did not want. They could settle worlds, but only worlds the elder races did not claim. They could speak, but no one had to listen. Kang had watched humanity struggle under these rules for decades. He had watched human colonies starve because trade agreements favored elder species. He had watched human ships attacked by pirates that the council refused to pursue. He had watched human leaders bow and scrape and beg for scraps from the galactic table. And slowly, quietly, he had watched humanity prepare. The door to the command center opened, and a young officer entered. Lieutenant Commander Minho Yoon was Kang's aide, a brilliant tactician who had graduated first in his class at the military academy. He carried a data tablet and wore the worried expression that had become common among the younger officers. "Admiral, the final fleet counts are in," Minho said. 812 combat vessels, 200 support ships, total crew complement of 320,000. Kang nodded. "And the hegemony? Their forward fleet is 200 capital ships. Each one is 5 times the size of our largest vessel. Their weapons have greater range and more power. Their shields are stronger. Their faster-than-light drives are more advanced. You've been studying the tactical reports." "Yes, sir." Minho hesitated. "Admiral, the numbers don't favor us. Even with our full fleet, the simulations show we lose 3 ships for every one of theirs. If this becomes a straight fight, we lose." Kang turned away from the view screen and looked at his young officer. "Do you know why I joined the fleet, Minho?" "No, sir. My grandfather fought in the last great war on Earth. Korea was a small country caught between powerful neighbors. Everyone told us to compromise, to accept, to survive by bending to stronger powers. My grandfather refused. He fought for years in terrible conditions against enemies with better weapons and more soldiers. When I asked him why, he said something I've never forgotten." Kang walked to a display case on the wall. Inside was an old rifle, rusty and worn, with a wooden stock that had been cracked and repaired many times. "This was his rifle," Kang said. "He carried it through 3 years of war. He told me that the weapon doesn't matter. The numbers don't matter. What matters is whether you're willing to fight for something more important than your own life. The hegemony has never fought an enemy like that. They've conquered species that valued survival above all else. They've crushed civilizations that would rather surrender than die." He turned back to Minho. "Humanity is different. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned that some things are worth dying for. The hegemony doesn't understand that. It's their weakness, and we're going to exploit it." The communication panel chimed, and a face appeared on the screen. It was Captain Ji-Won Lee, commander of the destroyer Hansen. She was a small woman with short hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Admiral, the Wolfpacks are in position," she reported. 30 squadrons spread across the projected hegemony supply routes. "We're ready to begin harassment operations on your order." "Good. Remember, Jiwan, your job isn't to win battles. Your job is to make them bleed. Hit their supply ships. Destroy their fuel depots. Attack their communication relays. Make them afraid to move without looking over their shoulder." Jiwan smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Understood, Admiral." "The wolves are hungry." The screen went dark, and Kang turned back to the view screen. More ships were arriving every hour. They were smaller than hegemony vessels, yes. Less powerful, yes. But they were fast, and they were many. And they were crewed by people who had nothing left to lose. The door opened again, and this time it was someone Kang had not expected. Elder Cerise of the Luminari delegation floated into the room, her translucent body glowing with soft blue light. The Luminari were one of the few elder species who had shown humanity any kindness over the years. "Admiral Kang," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "I came to warn you. The Council has voted to remain neutral in the coming conflict. They will not help you, but they will not help the hegemony either. I expected nothing else. There is more." Cerise drifted closer, her light dimming with what might have been shame. "Some council members are secretly providing intelligence to the hegemony. They want this war to end quickly. They want things to return to normal." Kang felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his face calm. "Thank you for telling me. Why are you helping us?" The Luminari was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was sad. "Long ago, my people were young like yours. We were curious and bold and full of fire. Then we met the elder races. They told us to compromise, to fit in, to accept our place in the order of things. We listened. We bent. And slowly, over centuries, we forgot who we were." Her light flickered. "I watch humanity now, and I see what we used to be. I don't want you to make our mistake." "We won't," Kang said. "No." Cerise moved toward the door. "I don't think you will. That's what terrifies the Council more than anything else." After she left, Kang stood alone in the command center for a long time. He thought about his grandfather and the old rifle in the case. He thought about the 12,000 dead in the Kepler colonies. He thought about his own children, grown now with families of their own, waiting on Earth for news of the war. Then he sat down in his command chair and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Kang. In 6 hours, we begin Operation Sunrise. Many of you will not survive the coming months. I won't lie to you about that. The hegemony is powerful. They have more ships, bigger weapons, thousands of years of experience. By every measure that matters to them, they should win this war easily." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But they don't know us. They've never fought a species that would rather die than kneel. They've never faced an enemy that treats every battle as personal. They think this war will be quick and easy. They think we'll surrender when the cost becomes too high." His voice hardened. "We're going to teach them otherwise. We're going to make them pay for every system, every planet, every rock in space. And when it's over, win or lose, the galaxy will know that humanity is not a species to be bullied. Not now, not ever." He closed the channel and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, the hegemony fleet was moving toward human space. Confident in their victory, they had no idea what was coming. The hegemony fleet arrived in human space like a storm rolling across the sky. 200 massive warships, each one a mountain of metal and weapons, moved in perfect formation through the darkness between stars. Admiral Vorath stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Crushing Hand, and smiled with satisfaction. This would be easy. The humans had refused to compromise, and now they would pay the price. In a few weeks, their colonies would be burning. In a few months, their homeworld would surrender. The council would shake their heads sadly and talk about how the young species should have listened to wiser voices. And the hegemony would add another footnote to history. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported, "we're detecting human ships at the edge of the system. Small vessels, probably scout ships. Ignore them. They can do nothing but watch and report back to their masters." Vorath settled into his command chair, which had been built to support his massive weight. "Signal the fleet. We proceed to the first colony world." Standard conquest formation. The fleet moved forward, engines burning bright against the void. They had traveled this path many times before, against many different species. The pattern was always the same. Show overwhelming force. Destroy any resistance. Accept surrender. Move on to the next target. But as the hours passed, strange reports began arriving from across the fleet. "Admiral, the supply ship Endless Bounty has stopped responding." Vorath frowned. "Engine failure?" "Unknown, sir." "We're also losing contact with the fuel tanker Prosperity's Gift." Before Vorath could respond, more reports flooded in. A communication relay had gone silent. A scout ship had vanished. Another supply vessel was sending a distress signal that cut off mid-transmission. "What is happening?" Vorath demanded. The answer came from the tactical display. Small human ships were appearing throughout the fleet's formation, striking from ambush, then disappearing before the heavy hegemony weapons could target them. They weren't attacking the warships. They were attacking everything else. Supply ships, fuel tankers, communication relays, the thin threads that kept a fleet alive and connected. Captain Ji-Wan Lee sat in the command chair of the Hanson and watched her crew work with deadly precision. Her ship was small, barely visible against the background radiation of space. The hegemony sensors had trouble tracking her. Their weapons had trouble hitting her. She was a knife in the dark, and she knew exactly where to cut. "Target destroyed," her weapons officer reported. "That's the third fuel tanker this hour." "Good. Find the next one." Ji-Wan studied her tactical display. Across the sector, other Wolfpack squadrons were doing the same thing. They weren't trying to defeat the hegemony fleet. They were trying to starve it. The hegemony had built their empire on overwhelming power. Their ships were huge because size meant strength. Their formations were tight because concentration meant victory. They had forgotten, if they ever knew, that an army travels on its stomach. Without fuel, the mighty warships couldn't move. Without supplies, their crews couldn't eat. Without communication, their commanders couldn't coordinate. Admiral Vorath realized the danger too late. He ordered his warships to protect the supply vessels, but that meant spreading his force thin. He ordered his scouts to hunt the human attackers, but the small human ships were faster and knew the territory better. He ordered his fleet to push forward anyway, hoping to reach the colony worlds before supplies ran out. That's when the humans sprang their second trap. The colony world of New Incheon had been evacuated weeks ago. The humans had moved everyone to safer locations, leaving behind only a skeleton defense force and a lot of automated weapons. When the hegemony fleet arrived, they found not a peaceful farming world, but a fortress. Mines floated in orbit, invisible until they detonated against hegemony hulls. Defense satellites opened fire from unexpected angles. Ground-based weapons launched missiles that had been designed specifically to penetrate hegemony shields. The hegemony fleet was still the stronger force. But every ship they lost, every hour they spent fighting, was another drain on supplies that weren't being replaced. On the council station, Ambassador Yuna Park watched the battle reports with a mixture of hope and fear. The human strategy was working better than expected. The hegemony was bleeding from 1,000 small cuts. But the cost was terrible. Human ships were dying too. Human soldiers were dying. And the hegemony still had more ships to spare. Ambassador Elder Cerise appeared at her door. The council has called an emergency session. The hegemony is demanding that we intervene. Una followed the luminary elder to the crystal chamber where she had refused the council's compromise months ago. The atmosphere was very different now. The elder race delegates looked nervous. Some looked angry. All of them looked scared. Vorath's holographic image dominated the center of the chamber. His stone-gray face was twisted with fury. "This is not war," he bellowed. "This is terrorism. The humans refuse to fight like civilized beings. They strike from shadows. They attack supply ships instead of warships. They use tricks and traps instead of honest battle. Because honest battle would mean we lose," Una said calmly. "We're not stupid, Ambassador Vorath. We know we can't defeat your fleet in a straight fight. So we're not fighting straight. The council must condemn these tactics." The High Speaker raised his arms. "The council takes no side in this conflict. Both parties must resolve their differences through what?" Una interrupted. "Compromise? The same compromise that would have forced us to abandon our homes and forget our dead? The same compromise that rewards aggression and punishes weakness?" She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You created this situation. You let the hegemony do whatever they wanted for centuries because you were afraid of them. You told younger species to accept their place, to bend, to break. Well, humanity doesn't break." Vorath's image flickered with rage. "You will break. I will bring 1,000 ships to your homeworld. I will burn your cities. You will lose," Una said quietly. "Maybe not this year. Maybe not next year. But you will lose. Because you're fighting for territory, and we're fighting for survival. You'll quit when the cost becomes too high. We never will." She turned to address the full council. "Every species here has a choice. You can keep pretending that the old rules still work. You can keep bending to whoever is strongest. Or you can stand up and say enough. Say that younger species have rights too. Say that blockading civilian worlds is wrong. Say that might doesn't make right." The chamber was silent. None of the elder races moved. Una smiled sadly. "I didn't think so. You've been compromising for so long you've forgotten how to stand. That's okay. Humanity will stand alone if we have to. We've done it before." She walked out of the chamber without looking back. Behind her, the elder races began to argue among themselves. Some were angry at the humans for disrupting the galactic order. Some were secretly pleased to see the hegemony struggling. A few, like Elder Cerise, were beginning to wonder if maybe the young species from Earth had something to teach them after all. The war continued. It would continue for many more months. But something had changed in that moment. The galaxy had seen humanity refuse to kneel, refuse to break, refuse to play by rules that had been designed to keep them weak. And deep in the heart of hegemony space, officers were beginning to whisper questions that had never been asked before. What if we lose? The colony world of Haven's Rest had been a peaceful place. Farmers grew crops in rich soil. Children played in green fields. Families gathered for dinner as the sun set behind purple mountains. 50,000 people had built lives there, far from the politics of Earth and the dangers of the galaxy. Then the hegemony came. Commander Yunji Bak had been a schoolteacher before the invasion. She taught history to teenagers who complained about homework and dreamed about traveling to other stars. She had never held a weapon in her life. She had never imagined she would need to. Now she crouched in the ruins of what had been a shopping center, holding a rifle that felt heavy and strange in her hands. Around her, 200 civilians waited for her orders. Farmers, shopkeepers, students, parents, They had chosen to stay behind when the evacuation ships left, knowing that someone needed to slow the hegemony down. "They're moving up the main street," her scout reported through a small radio. "About 40 soldiers. Heavy weapons." Yoonji closed her eyes and remembered her students. They were safe now, evacuated to a distant world where the hegemony couldn't reach them. But this had been their home. This had been everyone's home. "Wait until they reach the fountain," she said. "Then we hit them." The hegemony soldiers moved with confidence. They were professional warriors from a species that had conquered dozens of worlds. Their armor could stop most weapons. Their training had prepared them for any situation. They expected the humans to surrender quickly, the way other species always did. They didn't expect the fountain to explode. The bomb had been built from farming, equipment, and mining explosives. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The blast killed 8 soldiers instantly and wounded a dozen more. Before they could recover, human fighters opened fire from every direction. Windows, rooftops, drainage tunnels. The hegemony soldiers found themselves surrounded by enemies. They couldn't see. The battle lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, 32 hegemony soldiers were dead. 11 humans had died as well. But the message was clear. Taking Haven's Rest would not be easy. The hegemony commander responded by bringing in more troops. 10,000 soldiers landed in the capital city, supported by tanks and aircraft. They expected to pacify the population within 2 days. 3 months later, they still hadn't secured the capital. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a trap. The humans knew their city better than any invader could. They knew where to hide, where to ambush, where to disappear. When the hegemony destroyed one hiding place, the resistance moved to another. When they captured resistance fighters, 10 more appeared to take their place. Unji became a legend. The schoolteacher who killed generals. The woman who appeared from nowhere, struck without mercy, and vanished like smoke. The hegemony put a bounty on her head that could have bought a small starship. It didn't matter. Her own people would never betray her. On the 87th day of the occupation, Yoonji recorded a message that was broadcast across the galaxy. She sat in a bombed-out basement, her face thin and tired, her eyes burning with a light that cameras struggled to capture. "They keep asking why we won't surrender," she said. "They don't understand. This isn't about winning. We know we might not win. We know we might all die here. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we make them pay such a price for our world that they'll never want to take anyone's world again." She held up her rifle. It was old, battered, held together with tape and determination. "My grandmother carried a rifle like this during the wars on Earth. She was a farmer too. She fought against enemies who were stronger, better equipped, who had been told that victory was certain. She won because she was willing to sacrifice everything. Because freedom mattered more than comfort. Because standing up mattered more than surviving." Yoonji looked directly into the camera. The hegemony thinks they know what war means. They don't. For them, war is a calculation. Resources spent versus resources gained. They'll keep fighting as long as the numbers make sense. But for us, war is personal. Every soldier they send here has a face. Every building they destroy has memories. Every day they occupy our home is another reason to keep fighting. The message spread across the galaxy. Other species watched it with fascination and fear. They had never seen anything like this. Conquered peoples were supposed to accept their fate. They were supposed to bow to stronger powers. They weren't supposed to fight back with such fury. In the council chamber, Elder Cerise watched the recording 3 times. She remembered her own people's history, the wars they had fought before they learned to compromise. She remembered the fire that had burned in luminary hearts before they decided that survival was more important than pride. She wondered if they had made the right choice. Meanwhile, in space, The war continued. Captain Ji-Wan Lee and her Wolfpacks had destroyed so many supply ships that the hegemony fleet was running on emergency rations. Admiral Kang had won 3 major battles by refusing to fight fairly, by retreating when he should have attacked and attacking when he should have retreated. The hegemony still had more ships. They still had more soldiers. But their losses were mounting, and more importantly, their confidence was cracking. Admiral Vorath sat in his quarters on the crushing hand and stared at reports that made no sense. His fleet had lost 40 ships. Not to enemy warships, but to mines, ambushes, and suicide attacks. His ground forces on Haven's Rest had lost 3,000 soldiers to guerrilla fighters who shouldn't have lasted a week. For the first time in his long career, Vorath felt something he had never felt before. He had conquered many species. He had crushed resistance on dozens of worlds. But he had never faced an enemy like humanity. They didn't fight by the rules. They didn't calculate costs and benefits. They just kept fighting, no matter how many of them died, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. His aide entered the room. "Admiral, we've received a message from the Council. They're asking if we would be open to peace negotiations." Vorath's first instinct was to refuse. The hegemony did not negotiate with inferior species. The hegemony crushed them, but the numbers on his reports told a different story. At this rate of loss, the hegemony would win eventually, but the cost would be enormous. Other species were watching. If the mighty hegemony was bled dry by a young species from a single planet, what would that mean for their empire? What would that mean for the fear that had kept their conquests in line for centuries? "Tell them," Vorath said slowly, the words bitter in his mouth, "that we are willing to discuss terms." On Haven's Rest, Yunji Bak received the news in her basement headquarters. The war wasn't over, but the end was beginning. She looked at the people around her, the farmers and teachers and shopkeepers who had become soldiers. "We haven't won yet," she said. "But they're talking. They've never talked before. Not with any species they've conquered. Not once in 1,000 years." She smiled, and for just a moment, she looked like the schoolteacher she had been before the world changed. "I think we're teaching them something new." The peace negotiations took place on a neutral station at the edge of Council space. Both sides came with warships hanging in the darkness outside, a reminder that fighting could resume at any moment. But everyone knew that neither side wanted to continue. The war had cost too much. Ambassador Yuna Park entered the negotiation chamber and found it very different from the grand crystal halls of the Council. This room was plain, practical, with a simple table in the center and chairs for both delegations. No flowing robes, no glittering decorations, just tired beings who had seen too much death. Admiral Vorath was not present. He had been recalled to hegemony space in disgrace, his reputation destroyed by the long and bloody campaign. His replacement was a younger diplomat named Corvith, who sat with the stiff posture of someone who had learned hard lessons. "Ambassador Park," Corvith said, "I am authorized to discuss terms for ending the conflict." Yuna nodded and took her seat. Admiral Kang sat beside her, his face unreadable. Behind them stood Captain Ji-Wan Lee, now promoted to Commodore after her successful Wolfpack campaigns. Behind Ji-Wan stood Commander Yunji Bak, who had been brought from Haven's Rest to represent the colonists who had suffered most. "Before we discuss terms," Yuna said, "I want to be clear about something. We are not here to beg for mercy. We are not here to accept whatever scraps you offer. We are here because both sides want this war to end. That means both sides must be satisfied with the result." Corvith's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. The hegemony recognizes that this conflict has been different from our previous engagements. We are prepared to make concessions we would not normally consider. The negotiations lasted 3 days. There were arguments and accusations and moments when both sides threatened to walk away. But in the end, an agreement was reached. The Kepler colonies would be recognized as sovereign human territory, with clear borders that the hegemony would respect. Reparations would be paid to the families of those who died in the original blockade. Hegemony forces would withdraw from Haven's Rest and all other occupied human worlds. Prisoners on both sides would be returned, but Yuna wanted more. "There's one additional term," she said on the final day of negotiations. "The Council Charter must be amended." Corvith frowned. "That is not within my authority." "Then get authority from someone who can grant it." Yuna leaned forward. This war happened because the hegemony believed they could do whatever they wanted to younger species. They believed the Council would look the other way, as they always had. That ends now. The Council was called into emergency session. Elder races who had watched from the sidelines suddenly found themselves forced to make a choice. The High Speaker tried to maintain neutrality, but the situation had moved beyond his control. Yuna stood at the podium, where she had refused the Council's compromise almost a year ago. The chamber felt smaller now, or perhaps she had grown larger. "The war is over," she announced. "The hegemony has agreed to withdraw from human space and pay reparations for the lives they took. But that is not enough. Because if nothing else changes, this will happen again. Maybe not to humans. Maybe to some other young species who dares to settle a world the hegemony wants. Maybe to some other civilization that refuses to bend." She activated the chamber's display systems. A document appeared in the air, written in dozens of languages. "This is the new charter for galactic peace. It states that any species that blockades civilian worlds will face consequences from all signatories. Any species that uses starvation as a weapon will be sanctioned by the full community. Any species that targets non-combatants will find themselves isolated from galactic trade and communication." "And who will enforce this?" Corvith demanded. "The humans? You don't have the power to challenge the hegemony alone." "We're not alone." New lights appeared on the display. The Luminari had signed the charter. So had 3 other species who had been victims of hegemony aggression in the past. So had a dozen smaller powers who had watched humanity's fight with growing admiration. "Together," Yuna said, "we are stronger than any single empire. Together, we can create a galaxy where might does not make right, where young species have a chance to grow without being crushed by those who came before." The vote was called. 9 species voted in favor. 2 abstained. Only the hegemony voted against, a final gesture of defiance that meant nothing. The new charter passed. Afterward, Elder Cerise found Yuna standing at a viewport, watching the nebula's beautiful lights swirl in the darkness. "You've changed everything," Cerise said. "The galaxy will never be the same." Yuna was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother survived 3 wars on Earth. She used to say that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of justice. The old peace wasn't peace at all. It was just quiet oppression, with the strong taking from the weak because no one would stop them. Do you believe the new peace will be better? I believe we have a chance now. That's all anyone can ask for." Yuna turned to face the Luminari Elder. "The hegemony will try to rebuild their power. Other species will test the new rules. There will be more conflicts, more wars, more suffering. But at least now there's a structure that values everyone, not just the powerful." Cerise's light brightened. "When my people were young, we had fire like yours. We lost it when we learned to compromise too much. I had forgotten what it looked like. Maybe you can find it again. Perhaps." Cerise drifted toward the door. "Or perhaps we can learn from those who never lost it." On Haven's Rest, the hegemony occupation forces were leaving. Commander Yunji Bak stood in the ruins of the capital city and watched their ships rise into the sky. Behind her, the survivors were already beginning to rebuild. They cleared rubble and planted gardens and started to imagine a future they had thought was impossible. A young woman approached her. She had been one of Yoonji's students before the war. "Commander, I wanted to ask you something." "I'm not a commander anymore," Yoonji said. "The war is over. I'm just a teacher. You'll always be commander to us." The young woman hesitated. "Do you think it was worth it? All the death, all the suffering. Do you think it mattered?" Yoonji looked at the sky where the hegemony ships were disappearing. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days on Earth. She said that freedom is never free. Someone always has to pay for it. Someone always has to stand up and say no, even when standing up might mean falling down." She turned to her former student. 200,000 of us died in this war. I think about them every day. I'll think about them for the rest of my life. But because of what they sacrificed, no one will ever be able to do this to humanity again. No one will ever blockade our worlds and starve our children. No one will ever think we're weak enough to push around. She put her hand on the young woman's shoulder. "So yes, it was worth it. It was terrible and painful, and I wish it had never happened. But it was worth it." Across the galaxy, on Earth itself, Admiral Taiho Kang attended a memorial service for those who had died. 300,000 names were read aloud, each one a life that had ended too soon. Farmers and soldiers, teachers and engineers, young and old. All of them had given everything so that humanity could stand among the stars with pride. Kang thought about his grandfather's old rifle, still in its display case on his flagship. He thought about the generations of humans who had fought and died for freedom, never knowing that their descendants would carry that same spirit to the stars. The galaxy had learned something about humanity. They were not peaceful by nature. They were peaceful by choice. And when that choice was taken from them, when they were pushed too far, they became something the universe had rarely seen. They became warriors who would not break. As the memorial service ended and people began to drift away, Kang remained standing before the wall of names. A young officer approached him. "Admiral, the Council has sent a formal invitation. They want humanity to take a permanent seat among the 12 great powers." Kang smiled. It was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had seen too much war. But there was satisfaction in it too. "Tell them we accept. But also tell them this." He looked at the young officer with eyes that had watched humanity rise from obscurity to greatness. "We will sit at their table as equals. We will follow their rules as long as those rules are just. But if anyone ever tries to make us kneel again, we will remember who we are. We will remember what we're capable of." He turned back to the wall of names. "And we will fight."